After the armies of the last alliance broke the might of Mordor upon the plains of Gil-galad, Sauron's legions were driven back in defeat. Yet the war was not truly won, for Barad-dûr yet stood, and so the mighty host of elves and men would need to march on, into the very heart of Mordor and lay siege to the Black Tower. Yet one does not simply walk into Mordor. Two mighty mountain ranges encircled it on three sides, converging together in the northeast at a narrow gap. And there, Sauron had ordered the construction of the Morannon, the Black Gate. And so, there were only four possible paths by which the Alliance might have gained entry to Mordor. They could hurl themselves against the Black Gate, they could strike through the Vale of Minas Ithil, or they could swing wide around the northern or southern reaches of the mountains, assaulting Mordor instead from the east. And of these four paths, they chose the one that seems most terrible, a direct assault upon the grim and heavily defended Morannon. Across the mouth of the pass, from cliff to cliff, the Dark Lord had built a rampart of stone. In it, there was a single gate of iron, and upon its battlement, sentinels paced unceasingly. Beneath the hills, on either side, the rock was bored into 100 caves and maggot holes. There a host of orcs lurked, ready at a signal to issue forth like black ants going to war. None could pass the Teeth of Mordor and not feel their bite, unless they were summoned by Sauron, or knew the secret passwords that would open the Morannon, the Black Gate of his land. An assault upon such a gate would have surely cost many lives. Which begs the question, why did the last alliance not simply pass around the mountains altogether and come upon Mordor through its metaphorical back door? Was such a path even possible? Could the ground itself be crossed? And had Sauron, ever watchful, laid any defense against such an assault? In answering this question, it is useful to look at the movements of Sauron's eastern allies. Therefore, it is worth recalling that when Frodo and Sam sought passage into Mordor, they beheld an army of Easterlings passing through the Black Gate. But here and there, he caught the gleam of spears and helmets, and over the levels beside the roads, horsemen could be seen, riding in many companies. He remembered his vision from afar upon Armen Hen, so few days before, though now it seemed many years ago. Then he knew that the hope that had for one wild moment stirred in his heart was vain. The trumpets had not rung in challenge, but in greeting. This was no assault upon the Dark Lord by the men of Gondor, risen like avenging ghosts from the graves of valor long passed away. These were men of other race, out of the wide Eastlands, gathering to the summons of their overlord. Armies that had encamped before his gate by night, and now marched in to swell his mounting power. The fact that the Easterlings, who came of course out of the east, chose the Black Gate as their point of entry into Mordor, seems to suggest that whatever ground lay to the east of the Black Land offered them a harder road than the long march around the mountains. And this notion finds further support as Frodo and Sam venture on through Ithilien. For as they made their way southward toward the stair of Cirith Ungol, they came upon a company of Southrons, warriors of Harad, who likewise chose to pass through Ithilien, rather than approach Mordor from the east. Sam, eager to see more, went now and joined the guards. He scrambled a little way up into one of the larger of the bay trees. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of swarthy men in red running down the slope some way off, with green-clad warriors leaping after them, hewing them down as they fled. Arrows were thick in the air. Then suddenly, straight over the rim of their sheltering bank, a man fell, crashing through the slender trees, nearly on top of them. He came to rest in the fern a few feet away, face downward, green arrow feathers sticking from his neck below a golden collar. His scarlet robes were tattered, his corselet of overlapping brazen plates was rent and hewn, his black plaits of hair braided with gold were drenched with blood. His brown hand still clutched the hilt of a broken sword. This was no small gamble upon the part of the Southrons, for in passing so close to Gondor, they must have known that they ventured through perilous lands. And indeed, they found that the lands were watched over by Faramir and the rangers of Ithilien. The fact that the Southrons would risk such a perilous crossing seems once again to imply that the eastern approach to Mordor was no easy road. And yet, after Frodo and Sam actually entered the Black Land, we find that traffic did in fact flow freely into Mordor out of the east. Neither he nor Frodo knew anything of the great slave-worked fields away south in this wide realm, beyond the fumes of the mountain by the dark, sad waters of Lake Nurnen, nor of the great roads that ran away east and south to tributary lands, from which the soldiers of the Tower brought long wagon trains of goods and booty and fresh slaves. This passage confirms, beyond any doubt, that great roads did indeed run eastward and southward out of Mordor, roads that bore no small trickle of traffic either, for they carried long wagon trains laden with goods, with plunder, and with captives bound into slavery. The very existence of such roads proves that the terrain to the east was far from impassable. With this established, we may now return to the question of the last alliance, and ask again, given that the eastern lands were passable, why then did this vast host not simply skirt around Mordor and strike from the east, rather than hurl itself against the Black Gate needlessly? Let us consider the two possible routes they might have followed. The shorter of the two options was of course the route to the north of Mordor, which looped about the Ered Lithui, the Ash Mountains. Before them, darkling against a pallid sky, the great mountains reared their threatening heads. Upon the west of Mordor marched the gloomy range of Ethel Duath, the Mountains of Shadow, and upon the north, the broken peaks and barren ridges of Ered Lithui, grey as ash. To reach the far end of the Ash Mountains would have required a march of some 350 miles. From there, a further 300 miles would remain to cross back into the heart of Mordor and arrive at Barad-dûr, 650 miles in total. Such a march would have taken around 2 months for a medieval host, and while time itself was no small concern, it was not time that would have posed the gravest danger. It was water. For if we study the map, some 2/3 of that march, some 40 days of travel, would carry the army through an ashen country, which was utterly devoid of any major rivers. And as Frodo and Sam discovered, there was precious little water to be found in the mountains of Mordor. They had trudged for more than an hour when they heard a sound that brought them to a halt. Unbelievable, but unmistakable. Water trickling out of a gully on the left, so sharp and narrow that it looked as if the black cliff had been cloven by some huge axe. Water came dripping down, the last remains, maybe, of some sweet rain gathered from sunlit seas, but ill-fated to fall at last upon the walls of the Black Land and wander fruitless down into the dust. The last alliance was no modest force. It has been estimated that their number could have exceeded 100,000. A single medieval wagon might bear perhaps a ton of water. And so, to sustain such a host for even a single day, something in the order of 1,000 wagons would be required. And those wagons, in turn, would demand thousands of horses or oxen to draw them, beasts which themselves required water beyond what had already been accounted for. Thus the burden only multiplied upon itself. And even granting the presence of smaller streams unmarked upon the map, hunger would soon follow thirst as the next great trial. A single man requires somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 kilograms of food each day. For 100,000 men, this amounts to somewhere between 150 and 250 tons of food consumed daily. And so, medieval armies so often turned to the land for sustenance wherever they marched, and a host of such size could strip a region bare within a matter of days. It is worth noting that the gardens of the Entwives lay close at hand, and they could have yielded food in great abundance, food which might have sustained such an army upon a long march. Yet Sauron, ever cunning, had already foreseen this very possibility, and had put the gardens to flame.
I remember, it was long ago, in the time of the war between Sauron and the men of the sea, desire came over me to see Fimbrettil again. Very fair she was still in my eyes, when I had last seen her, though little like the Ent-maiden of old, for the Entwives were bent and browned by their labour, their hair parched by the sun to the hue of ripe corn, and their cheeks like red apples. Yet their eyes were still the eyes of our own people. We crossed over Anduin and came to their land. But we found a desert. It was all burned and uprooted, for war had passed over it.
And beyond this crisis of food and water, another peril loomed large upon this route. Even at the time of the War of the Last Alliance in the Second Age, the Easterlings dwelt beneath Sauron's shadow. Many stood among his sworn allies. To march around the northern edge of Mordor, then, would mean far more than crossing some empty wilderness. It would mean marching willingly into the arms of Sauron's eastern allies. And so, as the Last Alliance looked to their east from Dagorlad, they would have seen only barren country stretching ever eastward, deep into lands where the will of the Dark Lord already held firm sway. In Lindon, Gil-galad still maintained his power, and Gil-galad was aided by the Númenóreans. Elsewhere, Sauron reigned, and those who would be free took refuge in the fastnesses of wood and mountain, and ever fear pursued them. In the east and south, well nigh all men were under his dominion, and they grew strong in those days, and built many towns and walls of stone, and they were numerous, and fierce in war, and armed with iron. To them, Sauron was both king and god. A marching host, numbering 100,000 men and elves, cannot vanish or disguise their movements. Its columns would stretch on for miles. 1,000 campfires would blaze each night, their smoke rising plain for all to see from leagues away. The scouts of Rhûn would surely have marked every step, every pause, every point of weakness. And messengers might race eastward within a matter of days, summoning fresh troops long before the Alliance ever reached the eastern side of Mordor. And Sauron could have sent smaller groups of orcs to harry the Last Alliance in a series of skirmishes, especially as their supply lines would have run directly alongside those same mountains, offering the orcs of Mordor an easy target at their weakest points. Or Sauron could even have sent a larger force out of the Black Gate to attack the rear of the column, meaning that with every mile the Alliance pressed east along the Ered Lithui, they risked finding themselves caught between two hostile forces, poised to descend upon them at any given moment. Such a situation might well have plunged the entire campaign into disorder. Supplies would have been lost or stolen, horses scattered to the winds and communications severed, and so the northern road around Mordor was no true option at all. But what then of the southern route? True, it was the far longer of the two roads, a march of some 1,400 miles, requiring more than 4 months to complete. And yet, along this southern route, there stood allies who might have offered aid and supply, and many rivers besides. And once within the borders of Mordor, the army might well have lived off the land, for Nirn was the fertile heart of Sauron's dominion, the breadbasket upon which his realm depended. Its rivers, its fertile fields, and the great inland waters of the Sea of Nirnen meant that the region was capable of sustaining armies of staggering size. Yet, had Sauron's scouts brought word that the Last Alliance marched around the southern mountains, it seems certain that he would have put every field to the torch rather than have them fall into enemy hands. Still, water and fish would have remained in ready supply, and so perhaps, from a purely logistical standpoint, it seems reasonable that an invading force might seek to first secure Nirn, and from there push onward into the black wastes of Gorgoroth. Yet doing so would of course demand a great deal of time, and across those long months, disease, exhaustion, desertion, and the slow grinding wheel of attrition would steadily wear away at their strength, long before they ever came within sight of Barad-dûr. And every week that passed would grant Sauron further opportunity to watch the Alliance's every movement, to strengthen his southern defences, to fortify the mountain passes, to summon fresh hosts to his banner, and to lay ambush after ambush along their path. And Sauron would also be able to send forces forth from the newly conquered fortress of Minas Ithil, which would later come to be known instead as Minas Morgul, a stronghold which was able to garrison a vast host in preparation to strike. Frodo and Sam witnessed firsthand the size of the host, which was able to issue forth from that vale as they passed nearby, on their way to the pass of Cirith Ungol. Across the narrow valley, now almost on a level with his eyes, the walls of the evil city stood, and its cavernous gate, shaped like an open mouth with gleaming teeth, was gaping wide. And out of the gate an army came. All that host was clad in sable, dark as the night. Against the wan walls and the luminous pavement of the road, Frodo could see them, small black figures in rank upon rank, marching swiftly and silently, passing outwards in an endless stream. Before them went a great cavalry of horsemen, moving like ordered shadows, and at their head was one greater than all the rest, a rider, all black, save that on his hooded head he had a helm like a crown that flickered with a perilous light. So great an army had never issued from that vale since the days of Isildur's might. And there was a far greater danger upon the southern route than Minas Ithil, for just like the Easterlings, the men of Harad too had dwelt beneath the ever-deepening shadow of Sauron's influence for centuries. Many had already pledged their loyalty to the Dark Lord and bore a deep and abiding hatred for Gondor. To march south of Mordor would bring the last alliance perilously close to these lands, where they may well have faced vast legions of spearmen, archers, and the great lumbering Oliphants of the south. And so the last alliance turned instead toward the Black Gate itself, choosing the certainty of iron and blood over the slow and creeping death that the eastern approach would undoubtedly have offered them.